Last week we talked about the curse of Ham, and we put that in the context of a novel that had used that. We went through that. I was really interested in that, and we had to end abruptly because I had my book club that followed directly at that. So it's like I finished talking right up to the last minute, and boom, that was the end of that. So is there anything that was left over for those who were there? I'm going to revisit, if we would like, the curse of Ham in the course of talking about Genesis. But anything to be said about that? I want people to talk, and I want you to interrupt when you have something on your mind, especially with a small group like this. Anything? Okay. I've got a dog over here. Our neighbor's dog is dreaming, and she's kind of barking in her dream. So we lots of pet noises here. All right, let's do this. Do you see that?
Yes.
The display. Let's just. I would like to just look at the book of Genesis today, and to think it is a rich mine of information and insight that's probably unparalleled elsewhere in the Bible until you get probably to the New Testament. But the good news about this class is that if you're worried, I know that the church is under some criticism for being complicit with racism. We're reading a book about that in the book club. I think you'll feel good about the fact that the Bible does not support any complicity with racism. And in fact, the Bible directs us in exactly the opposite direction of a racialized organization of the human family. The Bible wants to bring all of the human family together. We're gonna see that, and then that theme continues all the way through from the creation of the first person and to the call of Abraham on through to the prophets who really interest me, the ministry of Jesus, and then the consummation of all things. That theme of the basic idea of bringing humanity and bringing all of the created order together in its ultimate goodness and truth and beauty under the gracious oversight or rule of Jesus Christ as the king or the sovereign of the world. That picture never changes from one cover of the Bible to the next. And let me show you how that works, and then we want to move to a discussion. Book of Genesis. This is a new idea that I have of organizing books in these little icons that represent the chapters. And where I've color coded the chapters with a red color is where there are these genealogies. And we'll focus on that a little bit more. You know, I say genealogy and I see two of the windows click off and someone's gonna go somewhere else. But don't be afraid. That also can be a lot of fun. At any rate, the book of Genesis is organized around the genealogies. And so you have in the first part up here, let's see, we have, let me do something that might help us a bit. There we go. All right. You see up here we have, oops. You see the marking? Creation and fall, and then comes an extended genealogy, and I'll show you how that works in a minute then. And then here's where the narrative works. We got flood, rainbow, and covenant. And these first 10 or 11 chapters are known as the primeval history. We're going to be mostly discussing that. And then with almost increasing lengths, we have the patriarchs, the story of the patriarchs. Abraham first, um, Isaac is a little one in here, and then Jacob is, of course, very interesting. He's the father of 12 sons who end up being the tribes of Israel. And then this very interesting one with Joseph, who is a son of Jacob, the youngest son of Jacob, and something of a favorite, unfortunately. But he ends up not as one of the patriarchs. Very, very interesting story. So that is the organization. And when we talk about these first 11 chapters, the story of Israel hasn't begun yet, because that is Abraham's progeny is Israel, basically, and that seems to be a chosen people. We want to think about chosenness today. But the first 11 chapters really narrate the relationship between the Creator God and the world as a whole, and all of the peoples of the world. And so we're really get a look at the overall picture of what God's intentions and God's stance with the whole world are now. Let's see if we do that. See if I can. I got to turn. So when we talk about racism, we want to look at, and by the way, we're going to have to look at these texts quickly, because I want to look at 4 or 5 of them. And I mean, they're absolutely loaded. This is the creation of humankind. We could spend, a week doing this, but let's touch on it quickly and see. So right in the first chapter, we have people being created. And I'll read this quickly. If you have Bibles, it would be good to have a Bible open to flip to these passages so you can see them in context in a familiar setting. But the text reads, after the creation of all things, then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them, interesting, have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created, here comes, humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. Now, what is there in this that might speak to us about race? I have an advantage because I've been thinking about this, but did anything leap into mind? Well, let's say this, is that there was a, go ahead.
No mention of race.
No mention of race, yes. That's very significant, is the organization of humanity is not. In fact, there is this idea that we have Adam and Eve, and this initial family really gives us a picture of humanity. The word Adam, by the way, is translated humankind. So humanity seems, in the biblical view, to have started in one place. And when we come along later on into the modern era, racism is the product, for those of you who weren't here last time, racism is the product, racist ideas are the product of the modern world. And when there's injustice towards one racial group, what happens is that the injustice comes to be justified by people who are benefiting from that injustice, who invent reasons to sort of sanitize the injustice. So when slavery became particularly odious in the United States, mostly in the American South, where it was a sort of a torture-based economic engine for the economy of the country as a whole, that whole cotton production thing, then there was a lot of people who came along and began to rationalize the racism and give reasons why African descent people needed to be set about to this, terribly hard labor and this life that was so difficult. And one of the reasons that they gave is called polygenesis, which means that it was a view of human beginnings. Anthropology hadn't developed very much at that point, so we really didn't, even scientists did not really understand where people came from, and it was plausible that there were actually multiple spontaneous human or human-like species that were arising in different places of the world, and those came to be the different races, which then underlay the idea that some people weren't really as human as others. And that idea infected the thinking in the United States quite a bit. But here we go into the Bible, and we see, there's no, even in the story system of the Bible, there's no indication that race is coming out of different places. It's all persons are coming out of the same family. And so, interestingly enough, even though some Christian interpreters of the Bible wanted to justify race and racism and racist ideas and support slavery, say in the United States, the idea of the rising of different peoples who were like subspecies or different kinds from one another was never strong in biblically informed places. In other words, the church has never much supported that. So this story, this idea of Adam and Eve, and then later we're going to see the story of Noah, which really makes the same point, is that all of the world comes together in Noah's family. And so I think that this is a block or a bulwark against that particular idea of racism that in any way envisions people to be apart from the human experience and the in the image of God creation of humanity. All persons are in the image of God. They're all equally precious and unspeakably valuable and have just breathtaking potential. That's a strong biblical idea. We don't think about that all the time. We diminish people, but the Bible supports people, and then that comes along preeminently in the person of Jesus Christ. We're always impressed. We say, well, those of us in church are accustomed to hearing, hey, Jesus was God. If you want to know what God was like, look at Jesus. But even more interesting is the fact that Jesus was a person. If you want to see what a person is like, look at Jesus. And that then becomes the template for you and for me. So that thought system is stitched right into biblical faith. I've talked enough about that. What do you think?
You're right.
Jean, please.
I think you're right on it. You nailed it. That's exactly what the Bible is telling us from the very beginning. That God created humankind, not races. Races aren't the issue at all.
Right. Other thoughts?
I think it's interesting that there's so much plural language in this short passage, in that there's the divine is plural and humankind is plural.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
What is human is found in the individual, but it's also found in the collective. So and then full humanity is seen with the creation of the woman and the man, so that you see the two of them, and there's somehow in that unit is also a full expression of humanity. So there's a marvelous mystery here. And I mean, we ought to study this more. This gets us a little afield of racism, but this is a whole nother, all of this comes up against other big interests that I have, but you're observing something that's important here. This is loaded with significance.
But in the first sentence, it says, let us make humankind in our image.
Yes.
But at the end, it says, so God created humankind in his image.
Yes.
In the image of God, he
Yes.
created them. So there's a little discrepancy there about
Right.
whether or not it's the group of gods that
Yes.
we have heard about in the Old Testament before,
Right.
as the first sentence indicates, or is it?
Right. Right. Yeah, that's an yeah, Gene, you're referring to a interpretation puzzle that's there, and there is a kind of pantheon that's implied there. Christians are quick to see the Trinity there. Maybe that this let's move from this to our next thing, so that we're not we don't bog down. We get through other stuff, realizing that we're going to leave some good stuff on the cutting room floor here. So let's move on. The curse of Ham. We talked about this last time, and I was kind of thinking that we have some new people here. Let's do this. This is the one thing that has been used against or to support racist ideas, probably the biggest thing in the Bible. Upon the plain reading of this text, it's very clear that Hamitic people are not being cursed. What do you say if we go through this? I wanted this to be available to us if you wanted to talk about it, but we also have talked about it, and let's, with your permission, I think I'll skip this. If we want, we'll come back to it. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So let's see. This is the curse of Ham is when we're going to come back to the Table of Nations, which is really interesting. But this is this strange story where Noah, probably hungover, ends up cursing his. It's really not Ham, his son. It ends up being Canaan, his grandson, and this becomes a biblical organization of the world. We have those graphics to come back to. Now we're back to this. These red things, I'd like to take you into a way to get a handle on some of this. And you tell me if this works or not. It's a little bit experimental, but let's see what you think of this. So these are the begats, you know, and when we're reading the Bible, we want to skip over these. It's like, you know, your eyeballs roll up into your head and there's all of these names and it's like, I don't have any idea. So is there another way to get a handle on the begats that can help us see where that's going? We know that the book is structured around them somewhat. So one of the things I did, I hadn't ever seen this done before to the extent that I've managed to do it, which you're the unfortunate victims of that, is to organize all of the begats in Genesis and I think the early part of Exodus. Now I know you can't see this. You can't see the names in this, and I'm going to break this down and I'm going to go through it quickly. This looks very complex, but I would say that it's not as complex as it is in the Bible because we just can't even touch it. But basically we have up here is Adam and Eve, and then there's the genealogies that come from them. This is what's called the Table of Nations, which is the story of Noah's 3 sons and so on. Then this is the Semitic group. They come down and pretty soon you've got Abraham here and so on. I'm going to show you another version of that, Abraham's, but there's a lot of these stray genealogies that seem to go nowhere. This is one of them up here, and so on. And I want to just make some observations of those going through, and to try to do this quickly, instead of trying to read a bunch of words to look at a chart, which does this. One of the things that we see in this chart is that all of those genealogies link together. But sometimes they become very thin. They only link through one person. Let's look at the first one. This to me is interesting. Adam and Eve, early chapters of the Bible, of Genesis. We know that they had Cain and Abel. We remember the story that Cain and Abel got into a dither, and Cain murdered his brother Abel. What we tend to forget is that Adam and Eve, after the dust clears from that whole situation, they have another son, a third son named Seth. And Seth becomes one through whom the promise or the activity of God seems to work, or seems to be connected with his progeny, great grandchildren and so on, which ends up with Noah. And of course we know about Noah in the early part of Genesis. But then there's this business. I'm just going to make this observation very quickly, because the reason I'm talking about this is because we think of the Bible as having chosenness. Jewish people we think of the Jews or the Semitic people were God's chosen people. That is crude as far as the Bible is concerned, because there seems to be ways that if there's a chosen family, it's not the whole family that's chosen. And then people from the other families are forever getting mixed into that. The thing I want to observe, and of course I've made these all available so you can look at them at your leisure, is that the first or a genealogy that's given is that of Cain. Cain is cursed. Cain has murdered his brother. We're off to the races as far as human sinfulness is concerned. But he has all of these children that culminate with Lamech, and then he has 4 by these 2 women. Circles are women, by the way, and squares are men.
Tom.
So, but this doesn't go anywhere. So interestingly enough, the Bible gives us a genealogy, but they're just a bunch of names, and they don't seem to go anywhere. But there is a branch that does go somewhere. And this is like finding your way through one of those mazes. So actually there's, let me flip back. Just to observe this, I think it's fascinating. I don't know what to do with it. Notice the names on this side very much correspond with names on the other side. Let's see. I'm pointing with my pointer, but you're not seeing that. So let me get this going. For example, Cain sounds like Kenan. Enoch sounds like Enos. Irad, maybe Jared.
Up a little bit.
This
I got volume up.
M name is this. I'm not sure where the sounds are coming. Lamech ends up here. So it's interesting that these genealogies look very much the same. I'm not sure that I can give accounting for that, but this kind of thing comes up when you begin to look at these in this fashion. Let me go to the next one. Now, notice it culminates with Noah, and then we have these 3 sons who are important. We know what happens to Noah. The whole earth goes through this flood, and Noah and his family and the animals are more important than we give them credit for. We haven't heard sermons about animals. I've never preached a sermon about animals. But I'm learning that they're important, and they're really important as we think about climate change. That's just a little advertisement for whatever it is we're going to do next. This is called the Table of Nations. And again, this is complex. We have Ham, who has been cursed. He's here. We have Japheth, who is here. And it is of these three, notice that this is now a single family again. All of the peoples of the world, see, everybody was wiped out with the flood, and Noah and his family come along. He has these three sons. And these are the sons who supposedly spread out over the world and settled in certain places. Ham, notably, settled in mostly Africa and the Middle East. Canaan is the land. It's interesting that the cursed one, his son, Canaan, is the one who settled in today's Palestine, or what we call Palestine. And that's where the drama of the Old and the New Testament really are pretty much played out. So that's all Hamitic territory. It is Shem, and it's from Shem that we get the word Semitic. His family seems to be the one through whom, this is the pathway that the promise follows to this individual, Terah, who is Abraham's father. I know that I'm going fast, and I know that this is
Doug, I'm having a technical problem. I wonder if anybody else has this. Every time you click on one of your slides, my Zoom goes away, and then it automatically reconnects again. And I missed the first part of what you're saying. Is anybody else seeing that, or is it just me?
I think it's just
okay.
you.
Mine's okay.
Let me announce when I'm making a change.
I'm gonna move my computer into a different room and see if I get a better connection there.
Okay, Dick, thank you.
Yeah.
Keep us posted though on that.
Okay,
We don't want to just ignore what you're saying here. All right, I'm going to switch slides now. We're set up to think that the whole promise is going to go through Shem and Terah. And so here we have the story of Abraham, or we have Abraham and his wife Sarah. Now this is a really interesting story because Abraham is identified as a favorite, some kind of has a special relationship with God, and is called by God, and it's through Abraham his family is going to bear this promise. But it's very interesting to see how that turns out to be not the way you would expect. Here's an interesting little piece right here that comes out when you chart this. Sarah has the same father as Abraham. Oops. They're sister and brother. And they are infertile during their ordinary childbearing years, I mean, to put it in our language. And so it looks pretty bad for the promise. And in the meantime, Abraham, with Sarah's blessing, has a child with Hagar. Hagar is an Egyptian. She's an Egyptian, which means that she belongs to the Hamitic group, right? If there's a curse there, right off the bat, here is an Egyptian woman who is bearing a child. And the child that she bears is Ishmael. And of course, once Isaac comes along, once amazingly in her old age, Sarah bears a child. Ishmael and Sarah wants to get rid of Ishmael, wants to get rid of Hagar, obviously, for reasons that we can pretty easily understand. But the Bible gives us something very interesting, is that it gives us another genealogy with Ishmael and his several, or his wives, who are here. Ishmael bears these kids or these children, and this whole group of people are also, this is another stopped genealogy, and then there's this genealogy that's just floating around and it doesn't start anywhere and it doesn't go anywhere, only to say that here's all of these folks are given to us in Genesis, and it seems important in the text that their family tree is laid out exhaustively in the text. They basically disappear off the edge of the story, and all we know is that they're carrying some special blessing, because the blessing of Abraham goes to Ishmael just as much as it goes to Isaac. So that by the text, now of course the Islamic world claims Ishmael and claims the Abrahamic promise as well, with some justification in the book of Genesis. Again, if we are looking to support an idea that it's, hey, it's only us, it's only a certain promised group, you know, the Bible keeps its promise to a chosen and doesn't include anyone else. It's pretty bracing to see how inclusive and how global the biblical narrative is, and leaves us hanging with, hey, there's a whole line of humanity that is coming out of Noah and coming out of this whole experience that is a blessed people. That the Christian church, you know, that we have this idea of chosenness that's rooted very strongly, particularly in Calvinist traditions. That we're the only place that God's doing God's work, and we're finding that there's a lot more of a globalism. There's a lot more an egalitarianism in the Bible, a lot more of a universalism that goes in the Bible. Now, again, I can't pause on all of these kinds of interesting things, but we have here is Esau. Esau was the twin of Jacob, and again, his whole family line, which is related to Ishmael's family line. And again, you have to chart this to really have that vivid that these two are connected. Is that I'm trying to make the point here is that when you look at this, it's like, this idea of chosenness is not nearly as tidy as it might seem, and there are forever people who are dashing in and out of the other groups to become wives or concubines, or the family trees are joining and rejoining. It's hard to make a case that there's any one particular group. It seems that there are faithful individuals who are chosen out of different families, but it's hard to make a case. I think I'll just suspend with that, only to say that Levi has a line as one of the patriarchs, has a line that culminates in the book of Exodus with Phineas, who is black, interestingly enough. Joseph goes down to Egypt. He's the I think he's the youngest. He's one of Rachel's children. His father is Jacob and his mother is Rachel. Joseph is the charmed youngest child who his brothers are jealous of, and he gets thrown into a pit and carried off to Egypt and does well in Egypt. Becomes the Pharaoh's chancellor, has a big position in the Egyptian culture. And what does Joseph do? Marries two Egyptian women. So here we have the Hamitic people are back in the gene pool again. Joseph is not named as one of the 12 patriarchs, even though he's a son of Jacob. It's his two sons who are grandchildren. So you look at this and you think everything that we might conclude about chosenness or about a special people or something, that all just blows up. It's not there. I've said enough on these charts. What do you think?
Interesting.
You know, I think it was a time when the rigid application of rules and what's understood didn't matter near as much. And I think a lot of what we have in the Bible seems inaccurate or seems loose, not carefully structured, because the most important thing is the story that God cares about us, that we're God's, that we're to live the life that God calls us to live.
Yes, thank you. I'm seeing it that way increasingly. Interestingly enough, I'd never put all of this together before, and it's like there's just so many interesting little things. For example, I was saying to Jean before most of the group came on, if you look, let me see if I can get my pencil working again here. There's another little interesting scandal. All right, so look down here at we have the parents here of Moses. Here's Moses, and this has also got a kind of a weird situation where Moses, how does this go? Moses' mother is also his aunt. So, they had a sort of a different value system than we do. And Aaron, as it turns out, is his brother. And of course, these folks are all, and then his wives, Zipporah is well, he has two wives. It's unclear in the scriptures whether these are one woman, these two are one, or they're two, but we know that this is a Hamitic woman or two women who are Hamitic. They're black. And if you look at the old 10 Commandments, you know who Zipporah, who's coming from a Hamitic world, who played the lead in the woman who was Moses' wife. Who was Moses in that? Who's a big actor in the 10 Commandments? Not Gregory Peck. Was it Gregory Peck?
Charlton Heston?
Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston was Moses, and his wife is Zipporah. You know who played that role? It was you know her. Her name was Yvonne DiCarlo.
Oh, yeah.
So I mean, Yvonne DiCarlo is Canadian. She's as white as a sheet, and you would this is presented to us in our movies and depictions of it in such a way that really obscures how very universal all of this is. All right, that was my one life attempt to talk about at any length about the genealogies. So there you are, and they're all available for you to go and look in and see if you can see other things that interest you. All right, the Tower of Babel. Again, we know that story. I'm going to read it to you. This is at the end of the history, and then we'll probably wrap up with this and just give us time to talk a bit. But we're through the flood. We're through the Ham and Japheth and Shem and so on. And we have this one last story that's here before we have the call of Abraham. And we know this well, but I'm just going to read the text so we're familiar. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. So they have building materials. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. That's interesting that they're afraid of that. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the mortals had built. And the Lord said, look, they are one people. They have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the earth. So let me make a couple of observations, and then we'll hear from you. There's a lot here that we'll again have to leave on the cutting room floor. The exact nature of the sin that was involved here was some form of over-the-top human pride in their own project here of building the city in this tower, and it was something that that God interrupted. The problem of human sin, of course, is we're not focusing on that right now, but that's a big deal in this part of Genesis. And the result of their sin is that the peoples are scattered across the face of the earth, so that the differences that we have in peoples, the inability to communicate with one another, probably by extension the misunderstandings we have between peoples, are not structured into the nature of the created reality in the first place, but they're contrary to God's intention and are a result of human sin. In other words, human differences, and I'd even put it this way, ethnicities, different religions, different cultures, different languages, where there is a lack of communication and so on, is the fruit of something that's wrong, that has gone wrong with human beings, and is a result of that, as opposed to the original intention of the world. There's a lot of movement in the Bible going forward, and we're just in Genesis now. We're not even in the, even big time into Genesis. We're just in the 10th chapter, or the 11th chapter. This diversity of people is seen as a negative kind of thing. And then this is a setup for us to hear Abraham's calling. And it is reminiscent, or we're reminded of this when we go into the upper room and at Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit falls upon the church. All of these scattered people are then the effort of the redemptive move of God is to bring these people back together again. So that's why this is worth citing, is that we get a lot of insights into the differences in people. And then, of course, I'll just wrap this up with Abraham's call, which follows right on the heels of the Babel story. Now, the Lord said to Abraham, "Go from your country and your kindred." This is Abraham now as an individual being tapped by God for a special vocation, and he and his family are called into this, which is basically the story of Israel. Your kindred and go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, which is Canaan. He's up in Haran, which is around where today's Iraq is. to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And here's the big line: in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So in that promise, I think that this is in these last words of this verse is a summary of the vocation and the calling of all people who are in the tradition of Abraham, and that would include Judaism and, important for us, the whole Christian movement. This is the summary of what the church is up to. So, your thoughts?
I wonder if the name Abram and the name Abraham, obviously they're similar. Obviously they're the same name, but maybe different linguistically. Say it came from different languages, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if that's telling us something about these stories. That the stories, all of them, have come to us from various groups of individuals who have believed in God in similar ways. So people who are living in Iraq might, what we call Iraq today,
Right.
might one name, and people living in the Levant, the Israel of today, with
Right.
another.
Yeah.
And so we've got a hodgepodge of stories, if you will, that have been knitted together to tell us the history of God's people.
Right.
I don't know if that helps people or not, but.
Well, yeah. Other thoughts? Thank you, Jean.
Doesn't Abra mean like a mountaintop? The word Abra. So Abraham is Ham's son on the mountaintop or something like that? Or am I thinking too hard on this?
What is Abraham is it's the father of the people, I think, is the etymology of Abraham. Someone can check that for us. I think that gets close to what that means. You know, again, there's so much in these particular texts that have, through the process that Jean describes for us, through all of these traditions, have come to us from many sources. They've been gathered, and then they've been experienced by believing people as carrying God's word for us. And so we're benefiting from the wisdom of our forebears here that have given us this. Again, I'm just picking out of these passages stuff that is significant that sometimes we miss, that really bears on the question that we're looking at now, and this whole question of the racial divisions that we've managed to get ourselves in the United States, but elsewhere too. Are those justified in the biblical record? And I think that right off the bat, we're 11 chapters into the Bible. There's 50 in Genesis. We're already finding a lot of evidence that undercuts these kinds of divisions in humanity.
I have a question about all the families of the earth shall be blessed. That encompasses Chinese and Asian as well, although that doesn't come through in your genealogies at all. So how can, but I think it means that, in my mind.
I think it certainly does. I think what the genealogies are saying to us is that, to the best of, well, I don't even think they would put it this way. I think that that Genesis is saying within its narrative world, without worrying about what we know about anthropology, within its narrative world, Genesis is telling us something about all the families of the earth. And that would certainly include, people who we would call Asian. And I suppose in this period of time that there was settlement in the New World. And so probably the whole earth was fairly much populated at this at this point. They were not aware of it. I mean, they didn't, in the 1400s, they did not know that Africa existed in Europe. So, I mean, they knew it existed in here in the Bible, but they didn't know it in Europe when you go forward. So there's big pieces of the human experience that have dropped out of the picture. We know more, but there's still a lot that we don't know. Yeah.
We are called, though, to think of all of the families of earth as blessed. That's clear in this passage.
Yes.
All of the families of the earth shall be blessed.
Well, I think that Abraham is getting his marching orders here. And it's, when we say Abraham, we're also thinking of his progeny, because ultimately it's going to come that through Isaac and Jacob is going to come these whole tribes, and that's going to compose the nation of Israel. That, the story goes on, and then it culminates with the church. This is really for us, and so through you, I think we can read this personally. Through you, Doug and Jean and Dick and so on, through you and First Presbyterian Church and all the churches, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. In other words, we have a vocation, we have a function. If we're chosen, it's like, no, we're volunteered for a certain kind of service, and that is to bring a blessing to everybody. Who takes this seriously are Koreans. We got to meet Koreans when Jenny and I were in LaGrange, where I served my last church, and there was an influx of Koreans because Kia Motors built a big plant there. So we got to know Koreans, and I got to know a couple of real characters who were Korean background. Koreans can be kind of, very, they are conformist, and they sort of dress alike, and in a lot of ways, going along with the program is important for Korean. But these two were really characters, and they had a ministry from Korea to a Christian ministry to East European gypsies. Put that together. But I think that's an altogether proper way to view this, is that they saw themselves as having a ministry to the Roma people. And there's no group of people that are more different than Korea and South Koreans than the Roma people in Eastern Europe. But that was a very interesting dance, and it was, it's like I never thought of that combination.
When we lived in Kenya, the Korean missionaries came to Kenya, and they never learned English. They went straight to Maasai or the language of the tribes that they were going to. So that was an open-eyer to me as well.
Yeah. That whole Korean, South Korea is one place where Presbyterians have done a fairly good job. You know, we're not, this may be a scandalous thing to say, but this is a reform movement rather than a missiological movement. It's not mission heavy. We do mission, and our church does mission for sure. But now I lost my train of thought there. We have been successful in some places, and South Korea is one of them. And some African places. You were in Kenya?
Yes.
So
I had Kenyan students in my elementary classroom, but when I had parent-teacher conferences, the parents of these children who were missionaries could not speak English, but they learned Maasai and the languages of the tribes that they were working with.
Okay. Our daughter spent a year in Malawi, and there's a strong Presbyterian presence in Malawi. She thinks there are more Presbyterians in Malawi than in the United States.
And there might be more in South Korea than the U.S. too. I don't know.
Well, we know there are more in South Korea than in the U.S. Yeah.
I visited some of the churches in South Korea too.
Yeah.
Presbyterian churches.
Yeah.
No.
So, other thoughts? Let's see. Let me. We have a couple of additional people who've come on. I hope I haven't left anybody in the in the waiting room. So, what we're gonna.
I had a comment about I'll call it the family tree that
Yes.
showed us. Did you develop that just from the Bible, or how did you do that?
Okay, I'll share that. The first part of it that I had was Josephus' Table of Nations, and he worked it out in that form. But I also here's a great way to cheat nowadays. I Googled it and went to Wikipedia and found some of those on the Wikipedia page. Let me show you. And printed them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I needed sort of a leg up. And then when I did consult the actual text of Genesis, sort of as a last ditch. So I realized that they were connected through important names. They were connected through Noah. They were connected through Abraham. That those were connected in that way. But yeah, that's how I managed to put that together. And I'm here to tell you, Wikipedia is a tremendous resource for biblical study, and Google is killer important. You can find a lot of stuff fast using Google. There's a handful of resources on the web that I've downloaded onto my phone, and I come back and I use them again and again and again. I'll tell you what they are, in a subsequent lesson sometime. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, other thoughts? Anything else?
No.
All right. Well, this is a quiet group.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm happy to do this. Next time, we're going to talk a little bit about Exodus. And then after that, the prophets. The prophets have a real universal vision of things. And then 2 classes in the New Testament, one on the Gospel according to Luke. The New Testament is really a wild place, and it takes all of these principles and the missionary calling for the people of God, and the importance of people's coming together, and it amplifies them. You know, the Christian ethos of mission is extremely strong and has an extremely strong reach to all sorts and conditions of people. So we aren't called to hate people or to consign people. We're called to be blessing to them. That's the abiding message of the